August 1944. Over the skies of Romania, American bombers droned through the darkness toward their target, the oil refineries at Ploesti. These refineries supplied over a third of Nazi Germany's fuel, and taking them out was essential to winning the conflict. But the price was steep. Lieutenant Richard Fellman sat in his B-24 Liberator bomber, nicknamed Never a Dull Moment. The 23-year-old navigator from the Bronx was on yet another dangerous run with the 98th Bombardment Group, 15th Air Force. The crew had survived several missions already. Their luck was about to run out. German fighters swarmed. The sky erupted with tracer fire and flak. Fellman's plane shuddered as rounds tore through the fuselage. The engine screamed, and then one exploded in flames. The pilot gave the order nobody wanted to hear. Bail out. Fellman jumped from 18,000 feet. The parachute deployed, and he floated down toward the mountains of Yugoslavia, not knowing if he would land in friendly territory or be captured by the Germans. Below him was Nazi-occupied Serbia. Around him, other parachutes blossomed as his crew scattered across the sky. Some would never make it to the ground alive. By the summer of 1944, hundreds of American airmen found themselves in Fellman's situation. Shot down over the Balkans during bombing runs, they were now stranded deep behind enemy lines. The Germans offered cash rewards to local villagers who turned in downed flyers. Capture meant a prisoner of war camp at best, execution at worst. But something remarkable was happening in the hills of Serbia. Something that would become one of the most incredible rescue stories in history, and yet remain hidden for over 50 years. When Fellman hit the ground, he braced for the worst. His ankle was injured from the landing. He tried to hide, but was quickly surrounded by men who looked nothing like German soldiers. They wore rough peasant clothing, carried old rifles, and had long beards. These were Serbian villagers and Chetnik resistance fighters. Instead of turning him in for the German reward money, they embraced him. An elderly man helped Fellman to his feet and gave him a crutch. They offered him fruit, flowers, and even slivovitz, a potent Serbian plum brandy. Though they shared no common language, the warmth of their welcome was unmistakable. The old man led Fellman about 500 yards to a small Serbian Orthodox church in the village. Inside, they both knelt and prayed, separated by language and nationality, but united in their humanity. Fellman would later write that the brotherhood of man had never been more meaningful. This scene repeated itself across the Serbian countryside throughout 1944. American, British, French, Italian, and Russian airmen who parachuted into Serbia were taken in by local families. These peasants were desperately poor. Food was scarce under German occupation. Many nights, Serbian families went hungry so the American airmen could eat. They shared what little bread they had, usually stale, along with goat's milk. Serbian women set up makeshift hospitals in barns and homes, treating wounded airmen with whatever supplies they could find. They moved the flyers from village to village under cover of darkness, always one step ahead of German patrols. The Germans actively searched for the downed pilots, and the penalty for hiding them was death. Not a single Serbian villager betrayed the airmen for German money. Not one, also. Think about that. These people had nothing. The reward could have fed their families for months, but they chose honor over survival. They did this under the leadership of General Draža Mihailović, commander of the Yugoslav army in the homeland, known as the Chetniks. Mihailović had ordered all his units to protect any Allied airmen who landed in their territory. He believed it was Serbia's duty to help those fighting against Nazi tyranny. Thousands of miles away in Washington, Mirjana Vujinović worked at the Yugoslav embassy. She was married to Lieutenant George Vojnović, an officer with the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's spy agency and predecessor to the CIA. George was stationed in Bari, Italy, coordinating intelligence operations in the Balkans. In the spring of 1944, Mirjana began hearing disturbing reports. Serbian guerrillas were sheltering hundreds of American airmen, but nobody was mounting a rescue. The men were trapped, and every day they remained behind enemy lines increased the risk of capture or attack. The German net was tightening. She wrote to her husband with urgency, "There are hundreds of them. Can you do something for them? It would be great if they are evacuated." That letter changed everything. George Vunović took the information to his superiors. The initial response was discouraging. The British, who considered Yugoslavia within their sphere of influence, had shifted all their support to the communist partisans led by Josip Broz Tito. They wanted nothing to do with Mihailovic's Chetniks. The politics of the region were complicated and messy, but the commander of the 15th Air Force, General Nathan Twining, was determined to bring his boys home. He did not care about British politics or communist sensitivities. Those were American airmen down there, and he wanted them back. The OSS devised a plan. It would be called Operation Halyard. 3 men would parachute into German-occupied Serbia to coordinate with Mihailovic and organize a mass evacuation. It was extraordinarily dangerous. The team would have to infiltrate enemy territory, make contact with the Chetniks, build a secret airstrip large enough for cargo planes, and somehow get hundreds of men out without alerting the Germans. The mission was approved at the highest level. When OSS Director General William Donovan presented the plan to President Franklin Roosevelt, he reportedly said, "Screw the British, let's get our boys out." Roosevelt agreed. Operation Halyard was officially greenlit on July 14, 1944. The team leader was Lieutenant George Mussolin, a large, imposing OSS officer who spoke fluent Serbian. He had spent months with Mihailovic's forces earlier in 1944 and had witnessed firsthand how the Serbs were sheltering downed airmen. When he returned to Italy and learned that no rescue mechanism existed for men in Chetnik territory, he became furious. Now he had his chance to do something about it. Joining Mussolini were Master Sergeant Michael Rajacic and Navy radio specialist Arthur Jibilian. All 3 spoke Serbo-Croatian. Jibilian, the radio man, would be their lifeline to the outside world. Without his radio working perfectly, the entire mission would fail. Shortly after midnight on August 2, 1944, an American plane crossed into Yugoslav airspace. On the ground near the village of Pranjani, a signal fire burned. 3 parachutes blossomed in the night sky. The Halyard team had arrived, disarmed. They landed 2 miles from the drop zone and made their way on foot toward Pranjani. Richard Fellman, the B-24 navigator, who had been shot down weeks earlier, was among the airmen waiting there. He heard a commotion in the darkness. Serbian voices were shouting and cheering. "Captain George! Captain George!" Moments later, a group of Chetniks appeared, surrounding a large man in an American uniform. They were kissing him, embracing him, tears streaming down their faces. The man walked up to Fellman and extended his hand. "I'm George Mussolini," he said. The next morning, Mussolini got to work. He expected to find perhaps 150 airmen scattered in the area. The actual number stunned him. There were at least 250 men divided into 6 groups, housed within a 10-mile radius of Pranjani. Some were wounded. Many were barefoot, their boots long worn out. They had grown beards and were dressed in a strange mix of flight gear and Serbian peasant clothes. Mussolini met with Mihailovic. The general assured him the Chetniks had done everything possible for the Americans. They had medical care. They had armed escorts. They were ready to go home. There was just one problem. They needed an airstrip, and they had less than a week to build it. The location chosen was Galavica Field near Pranjani, a meadow high on a mountainside. It was far from ideal. The field was studded with boulders. One end bordered dense forest, the other dropped off into a sheer cliff. It was barely 1,800 feet long. A C-47 cargo plane, the aircraft that would carry the men to safety, needed at least 2,000 feet to land with any margin for error. They would have to extend it, level it, and strengthen it, and they would have to do it fast, without power tools, without bulldozers, and without alerting the Germans. On the morning of August 3rd, work began. 250 American airmen joined forces with 300 Serbian villagers and Chetnik soldiers. They brought 60 ox carts and whatever farming tools that they could find. Some men used their bare hands. They cut down trees. They hauled away boulders. They gathered rocks and gravel from a nearby stream bed, loading them onto ox-drawn carts and hauling them up the mountain. They filled in potholes and low spots. They tamped down the earth with their feet over and over, creating a packed surface that might, just might, support the weight of a cargo plane. Every time a German aircraft flew overhead, the men scattered into the woods and waited until it passed. Then they returned to work. For 9 days, the work continued from dawn until dark. American airmen and Serbian peasants labored side by side, united in purpose. The Americans had no way to truly thank these people. Many of the Serbs did not speak English, but gratitude needed no translation. By August 8th, the airstrip was ready. It was not perfect. It was still too short by military standards, but it would have to do. Mussolini radioed Italy. The evacuation was scheduled for the night of August 9th. As darkness fell, the first 72 evacuees gathered at the airstrip. Among them were the sick and wounded. Each plane could carry only 12 men because of weight restrictions. The airstrip was too short for a fully loaded aircraft. The Air Force had even stripped unnecessary equipment from the planes and ordered them to carry only half a tank of fuel, just enough for the round trip. The night was tense. Would the planes come? Would the Germans attack? Would the runway hold? At 11 o'clock that night, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance. The crowd erupted in muted cheers. 6 C-47s appeared in the sky, escorted by fighter planes. Jubilian rushed onto the field with his signal lamp and flashed the code. Red, red, red. The first plane came in low and fast. The pilot had one shot at this. The wheels touched down on the rough mountain airstrip. The plane bounced, slowed, and came to a stop just short of the trees at the far end. It had worked. The other planes followed. Within minutes, all 6 were on the ground. Serbian villagers and Chetniks rushed to help the airmen aboard. There were hugs, tears, and hurried goodbyes. The Serbs who had sheltered these Americans, who had fed them from their own meager supplies, who had risked their lives to keep them safe, were now watching them leave. Then something extraordinary happened. The Americans began taking off their boots and handing them to the Serbian villagers. Most of the Serbs had no proper footwear. Some were barefoot. The airmen stripped off their flight jackets too, draping them over Serbian shoulders. The Serbs, in turn, gave the Americans traditional Serbian wool blankets to wrap around themselves. The planes took off one by one, vanishing into the night. 72 men were free. The next morning, more planes arrived, and the morning after that. Over the next 2 days, a total of 272 Allied airmen were evacuated from Pranjani. The operation ran like clockwork. Not a single plane was shot down. Not a single man was lost. Lieutenant Mussolini was replaced by Captain Nick Lalic, another OSS officer of Serbian descent, who continued the mission. As the military situation in Yugoslavia shifted and partisan forces advanced, the evacuation site moved. The team built new improvised airstrips at Košiljeva and later at Boljanic in Bosnia. Each time, Serbian villagers helped. Each time, American airmen went home. The last evacuation flight took place on December 27, 1944. 2 C-47s, escorted by 16 fighters, landed at Boljanic on a frozen strip barely long enough to support them. 20 airmen climbed aboard, along with the remaining Halyard team members. Before the planes took off, a final delivery arrived. 600 pairs of boots, requisitioned by George Vujovic as a gift to the Serbian villagers who had given so much. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. Operation Halyard was over. In total, 512 Allied airmen had been rescued. Not a single plane or airman had been lost during the evacuation. It was the largest rescue of American airmen in history. You would think such an incredible story would have made front-page news. You would think the men who risked everything would be celebrated as heroes. But Operation Halyard was immediately classified. The story was buried. For over 50 years, almost nobody knew it had happened. Meanwhile, politics. By the end of 1944, the Allies had shifted their full support to Tito's communist partisans. Mihailovich and his Chetniks were now seen as inconvenient. The Western powers wanted good relations with the new communist Yugoslavia. Celebrating Mihailovich's role in saving American lives would have been embarrassing. In 1946, Tito's government arrested Mihailovich and put him on trial for collaboration with the enemy. It was a show trial. The rescued American airmen, including Richard Feldman, begged the U.S. government to let them testify on Mihailovich's behalf. They were refused. The State Department did not want to interfere. Mihailovich was found guilty and executed by firing squad on July 17, 1946. He was buried in an unmarked grave. His last words were, "I strove for much, I undertook much, but the gales of the world have taken away both me and my work." The rescued airmen never forgot. They spent decades fighting to clear Mihailovich's name and tell the truth about Operation Halyard. Thanks to their efforts, President Harry Truman posthumously awarded Mihailovich the Legion of Merit, America's highest award for a foreign national. But the award itself was kept secret until 2005, when it was finally presented to Mihailovich's daughter. Richard Feldman spent the rest of his life honoring the Serbs who had saved him. He returned to Serbia in 1995 for the 50th anniversary of the mission. 50,000 Serbian people gathered on the mountain of Ravna Gora to give him a thunderous ovation. He died in 1999, but his mission to preserve the truth lived on. Today, there is a memorial at Galovica Field near Pranjani, where that impossible airstrip once stood. American and Serbian flags fly side by side. Every year, ceremonies are held to honor the civilians who risked everything for strangers. The U.S. Air Force sends representatives. The story is finally being told. Operation Halyard was a testament to courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the worst of times. It proved that ordinary people, when faced with evil, can choose to do extraordinary good. Those Serbian villagers had nothing. They were starving under occupation. But they gave everything they had to save American lives. And for 50 years, the world forgot them. We will not forget them now.